a Star Trek convention.
Melvar, can you give us some idea of how long this is going to last?
Until time stops.
You can't do this.
Now, we have a full schedule of events.
Can people who hate Star Trek leave?
Good question.
No, you have to stay even longer.
No.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Classic Comics. This is going to be a live stream covering the Star Trek original series episode Mirror Mirror. Where is that? Here we go. Well, okay, it's not showing up. All right, hold on. Okay, let me try this way. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So get rid of that. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm having some kind of technical difficulties. I'm not sure what is going on. I usually, when I do this, I upload a couple of PowerPoints with slides from the episode, but for some reason today the PowerPoints won't upload properly, so I'm going to have to do this by just uploading each video or each slide individually, I guess, because that's the only way this is going to work, I suppose. But yeah, we'll be covering Mirror Mirror today. Obviously, this is one of the most popular Star Trek episodes by far, a classic. Also, one of them that has been probably parodied or satirized more than just about any other. Okay. Hail to Lord Thoth. Hello, sir. Thank you for stopping by. Best episode of Star Trek all time, period. Yeah, I mean, it might be. Definitely a lot of folks think so. And I'm inclined to agree. It's definitely one of my personal favorites. Okay. And as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the Voyages for behind the scenes information on this episode. And I will read a bit from Cushman's book here. This is from an NBC press release for 1967. Captain Kirk and part of his crew are turned into evil counterparts of themselves when an ion storm sweeps them into another universe in Mirror Mirror on NBC Television Network's Star Trek. While on the planet Halkin negotiating for high-powered crystals, the storm strikes and sweeps Kirk and crew members to an identical Enterprise. There they encounter a hostile counterpart of Spock and a scheming Sulu. Kirk learns that he is romantically linked with Marlena, guest star Barbara Luna, who soon discovers that he is not the evil Kirk and tries to help him and his crew escape. Complicating the matter, the Empire, this dimension's savage counterpart to Kirk's Federation, has ordered Kirk to destroy the peaceful Halkins, who refuse to be intimidated over supplying dilithium crystals. If Kirk fails to obey, he will be killed, and the next in line for the captaincy will order the attack. The barbarian crew of the Enterprise advance in rank by assassinating their peers. The help provided by Marlena, who holds the rank of captain's woman, is her knowledge of the secret weapon that her Kirk used to become captain and to stay alive, an alien device called the Tantalus Field, which can monitor the movements of his enemies and kill them instantly from afar. The theme behind all this fun is spoken by Kirk. He asks the mirror Kirk, when change is predictable and inevitable or even beneficial, doesn't logic demand that you ate it? Mirror Spock responds, one man cannot summon the future. Kirk sells the idea saying, but one man can change the present. What about it, Spock? In every revolution, there's one man with a vision. As it often did in the guise of entertainment, Star Trek told its young audience to go boldly where they had never gone before and to make a difference. All right. So let me see. So I'll remove that. So I guess yeah, I think this will work. There we go. In fact, why don't and now let's go back the other way. Hold on. There we go. All right, so the episode begins with a excuse me, a landing party of Kirk, McCoy, Scotty, and Uhura are on the planet Halkin to negotiate a trade deal for dilithium crystals. However, the Halkins are pacifists and they refuse to deal with the Federation because they are concerned that the Federation will use them for aggressive purposes. An ion storm begins to erupt and the landing party decides to return to the Enterprise until the storm passes. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So they contact, or Spock contacts them rather, and he advises them that they should depart the planet before the storm hits because it could make beam up potentially dangerous. So they decide to beam up, but as they're beaming up, something goes awry. They appear briefly in their own transporter, then vanish, and then reappear. This time reappearing in another universe. And as we see this sort of winking effect as they shift from one universe to the other. They beam in again on what to is clearly a different Enterprise. And you know it's different because the crew are wearing different uniforms. And of course, most famously, Spock has a beard. Okay. And managing all these different files is going to be a pain. Okay, so yes, they have different uniforms. Spock has a beard, and in addition to that, also Kirk notices that they are all armed with knives. And Ethan Tois, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, sir. Ethan, hello, sir. Number one on my ranking as well. Yeah, I'm sure it is number one on a lot of folks' rankings. Now, due to the disruptive effects of the ion storm, Spock asks them if they are feeling any ill effects from the storm. And Kirk says that, yes, actually they are. And he suggests that McCoy take them to sickbay to check them out because the beam up was, as he says, a bit rough. But before they can leave, Mr. Kyle notes that there was some sort of disruption in the transporter beam. And Spock blames it on Kyle, who insists he did nothing wrong. But Mirror Spock isn't concerned and instead famously says, "Your agonizer, please." The agonizer, which seems to be like some kind of a taser or something, I guess is how we would interpret it today. And he zaps Kyle with the agonizer. And that ends the teaser. And this is written by Jerome Bixby. And also is directed by Mark Daniels. Again, one of the main directors for Star Trek, particularly beginning in the second season. He and Joseph Bevney are pretty much just switching off, alternating on episodes. Okay, yeah, so Kirk says that the beam out was a bit rough, so they should all go to sick bay and be checked out. And of course, everyone is bewildered about what the heck is going on. But Kirk tells them to keep quiet because obviously something's happened. You can see it's a different Enterprise. The lighting is a bit different, but also you see, of course, these symbols with the sword or dagger through the earth representing the Empire, the different uniforms, and of course, people are giving this Roman-style salute everywhere. The whole environment is generally just much more militaristic than it would normally be. So they get to sick bay. And of course, where is it? Okay. All right, hold on. I hit the wrong thing. Okay, yeah. So they arrive in sick bay. Well, thought they did. Hold on. Let me try this again. Okay, maybe. Oh, I tell you what. Maybe that's it. Maybe I need to clear out some of these files before I can fit in another. Oh, okay. I see now. Oh, there it is. Okay. 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 Yeah. So here we go. Now we're in sick bay. Oy, jeez. And in sick bay, they try to figure out what the heck is going on. And it's Kirk who has the thought that they may have shifted into a parallel universe, one that is very similar to theirs, but obviously has significant differences. Let's see here. Okay, so Kirk, they talk about how they come to the conclusion that the ion storm obviously must have somehow contributed to the shift. So they discuss how to resolve this, and he asks Scotty if he can come up with a way to adjust the transporter so they can beam back where they came from, basically. And Scotty believes that he can. So he tells Scotty to go to engineering and start working to adjust the transporter so they can get back. And he also tells Uhura to go up to the bridge because when they do this, Scotty's going to have to divert power from the engines to the transporters. Now, this will be noticed on Sulu's console up on the bridge. So they're going to need Uhura to, quote unquote, distract Sulu so he doesn't see the diversion of power. Okay. Okay. Now she goes up to the bridge. And of course, before she arrives, we see the bridge. And again, the bridge is different. Again, the symbols everywhere. We see Scotty and Sulu. Then Uhura arrives. And when she arrives, Sulu approaches her and begins flirting rather aggressively with her. The Sulu in this universe is obviously very interested in her. We also see, of course, that Sulu has this scar on his face. We don't know, we're never told how he got it. It seems kind of like the kind of scar like a dueling scar or something like that, maybe. Don't really know for sure. This Sulu is rather, rather smarmy. And as I say, very aggressive. He gets rather handsy with her. And she is not very receptive to his advances. But before she can really do anything about it, Kirk arrives on the bridge, and of course, everyone snaps to and salutes the captain. Now, before she left sickbay, Kirk had told her to review their orders and find out, basically what he's supposed to be doing and basically what his options are. because Spock has already said, it's unfortunate we're going to have to destroy these people because they won't cooperate. And Kirk is hoping, I guess, to try and find an alternative. But when he speaks to Uhura, she just tells him, yeah, there's no other real option here. They're supposed to either comply or be destroyed, which is not what he wanted to hear. Meanwhile, Scotty goes to engineering to try and make some adjustments, but when he arrives, security questions what he's doing. And Scotty says he's here on the captain's orders, but the red shirt that stops him says he's going to have to clear it with Sulu, who is the chief of security. Even though it's the captain's orders, he's still got to approve it. Which, it's like, well, talk about a paranoid police state. And then Scotty's just kind of like, okay, well, never mind. I'll talk to him myself. He then goes to a communicator panel and tells Kirk that, yeah, the phasers are fine. I wasn't able to make any adjustments because, yeah, he wanted Scotty to sabotage the before changing the transporter. The first thing he wanted to do was have him sabotage the phasers. That was the first thing. And he lets Kirk know, yeah, the phasers are fine, no damage. So Kirk's not going to be able to use that excuse to avoid destroying the Halkins. Now, Sulu at this point is already, taken aim at their capital city and is basically just waiting for the order to fire. Kirk is delaying. Spock arrives and sees that they haven't destroyed it yet, and he's like, why haven't you destroyed this target yet? That's standard procedure in these situations. And Kirk basically says he's reluctant. He hopes they can avoid destroying them. And again, Spock questions this because this isn't how the Empire operates. So then Kirk has Uhura contact the Halkins, and they speak to their leader, Tharn. And just as before in the previous universe, the Halkins refuse to give up their dilithium crystals because in this case, they know that the Empire is going to use them for destructive purposes, and due to their beliefs, he refuses to turn them over. And Kirk says, if you don't, we're just going to destroy you and take them anyway. But Tharn is persistent and basically refuses to cooperate. So then Kirk informs them that they have 12 hours to cooperate and to hand over the crystals, and if they don't, then they'll be destroyed. And I love this shot here with the look on Spock's face. He's just like, really? That's very unusual. Okay, where am I here? All right, so then Kirk tells Uhura to have McCoy and Scotty, or have Scotty meet him in sickbay. And as he's getting ready to leave, Chekhov hits a light or a control on his panel, and then he leaves and exits into the turbo lift. So that when Kirk exits the bridge, Chekhov is already there in the turbo lift. Where is it here? Here we go. And so when Kirk tries to exit the turbo lift, he is attacked immediately as soon as the door opens. And this is a really good shot because, it's really quick, because as soon as those doors open, Kirk just gets smacked apparently right in the face. And it's really well done. It's one of the best, I think, sort of fake punches or fake blows in the series because there's And even in this episode, actually, there's quite a few where it's like it's obvious that it's a fake punch. So then Chekhov pulls his phaser, and there's a whole group of guys there waiting to attack Kirk. And Chekhov reveals that he's going to assassinate Kirk now because this is how they advance in rank, or at least one of the ways they advance is by assassinating their superiors. And Chekhov gloats that no one will question the death of a captain who has refused an order of the Empire, mainly that not destroying the Halkans as he is supposed to. But before he can phaser Kirk, one of his henchmen then turns on him and attacks him, knocking the phaser out of his hand. And they grapple, and the henchman knocks Chekhov unconscious. Meanwhile, Kirk starts grappling with the other two. He manages to throw one of them down. And then the guy, the one working with Chekhov is in blue. I forget the character's name, but he phasers one of the henchmen, disintegrating him. And then phasers the other one as well. And that's the guy right there. Oh, come on. And then he phasers and disintegrates the other guy. And then some men who are Kirk's henchmen, basically, they arrive too late. And the one who had worked with Chekhov, he basically turned on Chekhov and helped Kirk survive, hoping to be rewarded with a promotion. And Kirk, Kirk thanks him by just decking him and saying, "Not on my ship." He then goes to sickbay, where he meets again with Scotty and the others. Where is this? Yeah, here we go. Or actually, no, it's not sickbay. It's in Kirk's quarters. Excuse me. They meet in Kirk's quarters, and it's here where he talks to Scotty and devises the plan to adjust the transporters and send them back. Kirk poses this plan to the computer, and the computer gives them a way of adjusting the transporter so that this can be done. But Scotty's not going to be able to do it alone. He's going to need McCoy's help to do it. Then they wonder, of course, what kind of people are they? You know, what are they like in this universe? So Kirk plays his service record. And of course, it's basically a series of atrocities. He became captain by assassinating Pike, and then basically committing a series of mass murders on all his missions. And so they're like, okay, well, now we know. And then McCoy asks the question, well, what are we like in our universe? Or rather, what are our counterparts up to back in our universe on our Enterprise? And then we cut back to the proper Enterprise, where we see the other Kirk is clearly not in command of the ship, and Spock has had the other Kirk as well as the other counterparts for Scotty Uhura, and McCoy thrown into the brig. And of course, this Kirk makes a lot of threats about how he's going to punish Spock and have him killed. He questions what's going on. You know, why are the uniforms different? Where's your beard, et cetera, et cetera. Spock says he can answer. I can answer none of your questions at this time. Then Kirk tries to, or the other Kirk tries to bribe Spock into letting them out of the brig. But again, Spock refuses to cooperate with him. And Kirk says, what will it take to bribe you, Spock? And Spock simply says, fascinating. Now, later, he encounters the mirror Spock, and then, as they're speaking, they pass by the room where the agony booth is, and Chekhov has been placed into the agony booth for punishment. And this is a scene where they've clearly enhanced the effects, I believe. I don't think this is simply the original effects from the episode. Actually, a little bit of what looks like lens flare there. Spock asks if how long Kirk is going to keep him in the booth. Spock says, Kirk says that he hasn't decided yet. Spock notes that his behavior warrants execution, and Kirk simply says, I have not decided yet. Then Kirk and Spock have a discussion, and Spock says that, if you don't stop this, as he terms it, bizarre, unpredictable behavior, I'm going to have to take action. Basically, I'm going to have to kill you and take over, and he says, I don't particularly want that. I've liked cooperating with you. I think we work well together, but I'm going to have to kill you, basically, if you don't start doing things properly. And Kirk says he has a reason for what he's doing, basically, but doesn't get into any details, and warns Spock that, moving against me would be a bad idea. I'm a formidable enemy. And Spock says, I know you are. I trust you will find that the reverse is also true. So then Kirk, or actually, no, first we go back to engineering. And again, Scotty tries to get engineering. He is stopped by a red shirt, but then McCoy sneaks up behind and gives him a sedative and knocks him out. They then go into engineering and begin working on the transporter. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. Yeah. And this is a different view of engineering than we normally get. Of course, usually the camera's down here somewhere, usually somewhere around or over here. The engines, of course, are up here that away. We got that gantry over here. So this is a new set that they had added in for this episode, giving us a different look. And I'm trying to remember if they ever use this set again. They probably do, but I can't remember a specific example of that. Meanwhile, Kirk goes back to his quarters. And of course, when he gets to his quarters, he gets a bit of a surprise because there is a woman in his bed. And the woman is named Marlena, played by Barbara Luna, the guest star in this episode. And of course, we quickly learned that Marlena and Kirk are lovers, and she is basically what is termed the captain's woman. In this universe, the captain gets to have basically a concubine, for lack of a better term. She expresses, I guess she's aware of him not carrying through with destruction of the Halkins yet. I guess maybe the crew is talking. And of course, she expresses some puzzlement about this and says, surmises that, well, obviously the Halkins must have something you want or need or something like that, noting that, of course, you're scheming. You must be, you always are. Kirk is, of course, evasive and doesn't tell her anything specific. Then he is contacted by Spock, who says that he has been in communication with Starfleet, and that, or not Starfleet, but the Empire, excuse me, and that he has been ordered to give Kirk until dawn over the principal target, which is, I guess, their main city, until dawn over their main city. And if Kirk doesn't destroy the Halkins by then, he is authorized to kill Kirk and take over as captain. Okay. Now, after that discussion, again, Marlena questions how he's being so merciful, as she says, you're being merciful to the Halkins, you're having mercy for Spock, and she expresses kind of bewilderment about what he's doing and what he's up to. And Kirk is just kind of nonchalant about the whole thing, again, not trying to give her any specific information. And then she suggests using the Tantalus field. And of course, Kirk doesn't know what the Tantalus field is. So again, he's just kind of tight-lipped. Marlena goes over and opens a panel on the wall, revealing this device. And as she says, Kirk owes all his success to a dead alien scientist in a plundered laboratory. Apparently, this was created by some alien scientist that Kirk killed, and he appropriated the device afterwards. And she notes that she hates this thing, and Kirk says, "Oh, it's not so bad, is it?" And she says, "Well, of course you don't think so. After all, this is what made you captain. You can make any enemy of yours you want disappear at the press of a button." And she then uses the field to spy on Spock, bringing him up on the little screen. And then she suggests that maybe they should just go ahead and get rid of Spock now. And Marlena gloats that she could kill him just with the push of a button if she wanted to. But Kirk forbids her from doing that and shuts the device off. She then, Marlena then excuses herself and goes to another room. While she's in there, Kirk contacts Scotty, asking about the progress on the transporter. And then Scotty tells them that actually the situation is worse than they think, because the whole issue is that as Scotty has put it, the field density between the two universes was, I guess, weakened by the ion storm, and that's how they got switched. But the storm is past, and now the field densities between the two universes are starting to increase again and return to normal. And Scotty says that once the field densities return to normal, basically beaming back to where we belong is going to be pretty much impossible. And Kirk asks how long they have, and Scotty says, "Oh, just about 30 minutes," which they thought they had a few hours. So now their clock is much shorter than they thought it was, and necessitates them hurrying up. Now, while this is going on, Spock becomes aware of heavy use of the computer by Kirk and by Scotty. He then asks the computer what's going on, and asks what kind of information is being accessed. Basically, what are they up to? And the computer says that the files are voice locked. Basically, you need voice identification to open them because they're highly encrypted. Now, as they're having this discussion, Spock notes that Sulu is observing his activity as well. He then contacts Sulu, and Sulu says It's not hard to figure out what Kirk is up to on the computer. He knows that you're going to have to kill him, so he's obviously using the computer to devise some sort of plot to kill you first, and then says that, I hope that you're successful, because if you fail, then I'm going to have to kill him. And as we all know, Captain Kirk's enemies have a habit of disappearing conveniently. But Spock isn't moved by his comments and says, I know that the main reason you're listening and that you're uh, plotting against me as well is because you're hoping that after Kirk is dead, then I'll be captain, but then you'll be just one seat. You'll be the first in command, and then you'll just have to kill Spock. Then you'll be the captain. Let's see. Where are we? Okay, yeah. So meanwhile, Marlena emerges from the other room wearing this very sheer kind of, I don't know, nightgown, negligee. I don't know what you'd call it. But she's looking mighty nice in it, that's for sure. They then have another discussion. And basically, Marlena begins to ask, what are your plans for me? Because she's sort of drawn the conclusion that Kirk has some big plan in mind that's going to help him seize power. And she wonders, well, after this plan you pull off, what about me? What's my place in this all going to be? And she then tries to basically initiate some sexy time. But of course, Kirk's kind of preoccupied with other things. He's kind of in the middle of something. And so he's not too interested in reciprocating. And at first she gets angry, but then he kind of talks her down. And then he leaves and gets in the turbo lift, and then he calls Uhura on the bridge and tells her that they're almost ready to make their move, so she's going to need to distract Sulu so he doesn't see the diversion of power from the engines to the transporter. And she says, yes, sir. She understands the assignment. So then she approaches Sulu and begins flirting with him rather aggressively, complaining rather loudly that he basically wasn't persistent enough in coming on to her earlier. Okay. And she distracts him just long enough for the diversion of power. A little light goes off on Sulu's board, but he is understandably preoccupied because he's got his face full of or his chest, basically. Okay, and then she gives Sulu a nice big smack. And she really lays into him too. I mean, she she doesn't hold back too much. She really whops him. Okay. Now, Spock goes to the transporter room where he catches Kirk making adjustments on the transporter. He then demands to know exactly what Kirk and the others are up to. Kirk refuses to say anything and basically just tells Sulu, look, if you're going to kill me, just go ahead and kill me and get on with it. Instead, Spock takes him to sickbay, where, of course, the others are waiting. But then Kirk attacks Spock, and a brawl ensues with the four of them fighting Spock. And, of course, Vulcans are pretty much superhuman, so they have their hands full. And Spock is pretty much smacking them all over the place. And then Uhura grabs, and I'm not sure what it is. It looked like it's supposed to be a skull, but like the skull of some kind of an alien or something. I don't know. But she grabs a large object, hands it to Kirk, and he bashes Spock over the head with it, which takes him down. But then McCoy examines Spock and says that he's severely injured and he'll die if he doesn't receive treatment. Now, of course, they've got only minutes left to make the transfer back to their other universe. So Scotty is urging them to just get back to the transporter right away. Yeah, here we go. Because they've got, I think at this point, they've only got like maybe 10, 15 minutes left. And FKHC 2005 says, yeah, he's dead, Jim. No, not dead yet. Not quite dead. Only mostly dead. Okay, so while this is going on, Marlena has been observing them with the Tantalus field. So she has some idea now of what is going on. Now, Kirk agrees to give McCoy a few minutes to take care of the other Spock and not just leave him to die. But while they're doing this, or while McCoy is doing this, Sulu arrives with a group of red shirts and then announces loudly that basically he's going to kill them all. And of course, with them and Spock, or with Kirk and Spock out of the way, he will then be the new captain of the Enterprise. FKHC 2005 says, just resting then. Yeah, he's pining. He's pining. he's he's pining for the fjords. He's just been nailed to the bed. He's he's just been nailed up there. Okay, but then suddenly the red shirts start to vanish in a flash of light, and we see that Marlena is using the Tantalus device to eliminate the guards one by one. And sure enough, it turns out you can kill people just with the press of a button. A well manicured button, too, or well manicured finger. Not a well manicured button, but a well manicured finger as well. And yeah, one by one, the guards are disintegrated. Or I don't know, it's never in the episode, they never say exactly what happens to them when they're zapped away. It seems like I remember that there's a novel, maybe. Was that it? Was it a novel? Maybe there was a comic where it's revealed that the people zapped by the Tantalus field aren't dead. They just get zapped like to some other dimension or something like that. And I think there's a story where the people zapped by the Tantalus field come back or restored or something. I don't remember. I don't remember the name of it. But that would be interesting to have it turn out that that's the case. They never. It's surprising that the Tantalus field didn't pop up more, like in novels and in other sort of what would you call it, beta canon. Okay, so with the guards out of the way, Kirk faces off against Sulu and incapacitates him laughably easily. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing how easily Kirk takes him out. Now, of course, at this point, Scotty is pretty much just begging them, look, we got to go, because now we've got, less than 10 minutes. And Kirk urges McCoy, saying, look, okay, it's time to leave. McCoy says, the rest of you go on. I'll stay here a few more minutes just to make sure he's stable or whatever, and then I'll be along. And Kirk is reluctant, but they kind of don't have a whole lot of options. So he agrees and says, okay, but just a few minutes. So they leave. After they leave, the mirror Spock awakens, and of course he immediately wants to know why he is still alive. Why hasn't he been killed? McCoy's not talking though. So Spock then performs a mind meld on him. Great shot of it there. And really, there's a lot of really good shots. This is I think one of the episodes that's got, I don't know, it just looks really good. It's one of the best looking episodes, I think, in terms of how the shots are composed and the lighting. They're probably not doing anything they don't normally do. It's probably just in my mind that it seems different, but it sure seems like Mark Daniels did a great job on this episode for the most part. Although, and I'll get to it later, but as with some other episodes, the use of stuntmen in some of the fight scenes is just kind of painfully obvious. So they go to the transporter room, Kirk, Scotty, and Uhura, but when they arrive there, they find Marlena is there waiting for them. And she asks to be taken with them where they're going. And Kirk says, I'm sorry, but we just can't do that, because we've only calibrated the transporter for 4 people. So then Marlena pulls a phaser and demands to be taken along. And Spock then, or not Spock, but Kirk then attempts to try and talk her down and get her to cooperate. But then Uhura jumps Marlena and manages to get the phaser away from her. And then McCoy, or not McCoy, God, I'm getting mixed up here. Then McCoy realizes that the power to the transporter has been cut off. And they realize that the crew must be onto them. Now, Scotty says that they can still perform the beam out, but because of this situation, someone is going to have to stay behind, because they were going to set the transporter to function automatically and then all 4 of them beam back, but one of them is going to have to stay behind and not go back. Scotty, of course, volunteers to be the person, but Kirk says no, he will do it, and he orders Uhura and Scotty onto the transporter. And of course, then wonders where the heck McCoy is. Why hasn't he arrived yet? Then Spock arrives with McCoy and reveals that he's the one who had the power to the transporter shut off. And at this point, it's pretty obvious that Spock has, from the mind meld, he has figured out what is going on, that they're from another universe, and basically they're just trying to get back where they went, and if they would just let them do it, there would be a lot less trouble. So Spock then tells the crew to restore power to the transporter and says he'll operate the transporter while they beam back. It's at this point that Kirk then asks Spock, how long is it going to be? What do projections say? How long will it take for the Empire to be overthrown? And I think Spock says something like 240 years or something like that, 200 something years. And then he questions the logic of the Empire, the illogic of waste, Mr. Spock. And he submits to Spock that the Empire is illogical and that Spock is illogical to be a part of it. And then basically plants the idea in the head of Spock of trying to rebel against the Empire, suggesting that Spock take control of the Enterprise, and as he says, trying to find a way to spare the Halkins and make it stick. How that would happen, I don't know. Because because if you could do that, then why couldn't Kirk have just done it? I don't know. It just seems like it's he's kind of basically setting Spock up to be killed here almost. Of course, Spock understandably says that one man cannot summon the future. And then Kirk reveals to Spock that there is a weapon inside the captain's quarters, the Tantalus field, of course, that will make him invincible. He then gets on the transporter and says, in every revolution, there is one man with a vision. Okay, well, why didn't that come up? Where was it? Okay, so is it? Oh, okay, yeah, it's two. Let me, there it is. Okay, hold on. There we go. He says that there in every revolution there is one man with a vision, and the other Spock says, I will consider it. He then beams them out. And they reappear back on their own Enterprise. And we know it's their Enterprise. It looks different. And of course, they're back in their old uniforms or proper uniforms. And of course, Spock does not have a beard. And they're back where they belong. So all's well that ends well, I suppose. Now, later on, they're on the bridge talking with Spock. And McCoy and Kirk compare Spock, or well, no, first they ask how Spock was able to determine that they were imposters so quickly. And Spock notes that being that Kirk and the others, being civilized people, it was much easier for them in that other universe to pretend to be savages, more so than their counterparts. Their counterparts being savages weren't so easily able to impersonate civilized people and behave in a civilized manner. And basically, they gave themselves away with their behavior. And then McCoy and Kirk tease Spock a bit, comparing him to the Spock from the Mirror Universe and noting how he looked good with a beard, and it was actually maybe a bit of an improvement. And then Spock notes that during the time that the imposters were on the Enterprise, he got to examine them in great detail at length, and he found them to be, as he put it, treacherous, ruthless, duplicitous, unprincipled, savage, bloodthirsty cutthroats. As he says, the very flower of humanity. And the episode ends there. Well, actually, not quite. Oh, I forgot. So then a lieutenant, which is Marlena, this universe's counterpart of Marlena, comes onto the bridge and submits a report to Kirk. Kirk, of course, literally does like a double take when he sees her, like, what the what? And even Uhura and Scotty are kind of like somewhat perplexed by her presence as well. He signs the report, gives it back to her. Spock then asks if he has seen her before. noting Spock's reaction of recognition. And Kirk says, "Oh, no, we haven't met." Exactly. She just seems like a very nice girl. I think we could be good friends. Hello, Ross Ashburn. Thank you for stopping by. Ross says, I want to see a fan-made inverted version of this episode that follows the Mirror Universe crew. You mean like the aftermath of it, where we see what happened after this? Because there have been various versions of that. Most of them, they're not canon. There's been novels and some fan fiction that has followed what happened after this episode. And there's different versions, and some Spock was just immediately killed pretty much by the other Kirk. And then in others, Spock succeeded. In the mainstream universe, though, yes, Spock succeeded, because when we finally revisited the Mirror Universe in DS9, we find that, Spock sort of tried to institute basically a kindler, gentler empire, and this eventually led to them sort of taking the boot off of all the worlds they had been in control of, and then those worlds basically rose up against them and overthrew them. And by the time of Deep Space Nine, of course, the situation is inverted, where now humans are basically seen as the scum of the galaxy and they're slaves, and they're completely dominated. Oh, no, Ross says no from the start. Oh, okay, so you mean like following the Mirror Universe crew on the regular Enterprise during this episode? I guess that's what you mean. I mean, I don't know, but it wouldn't, there wouldn't be a whole lot. It'd be like maybe half an episode, because by midway through the episode, they're in the brig. So I don't know. There just wouldn't be a whole lot. And hello, Gwagnar. Hey, man, thanks for stopping by. Good to see you as always. And as previously mentioned, Barbara Luna, of course, is the main guest star in this episode. And really the only really significant one, the one that folks remember. And no wonder, really. I mean, like I say, she's looking pretty good in this episode, no doubt about it. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at Cushman's writings on this episode and how this episode came about. Mirror Mirror is an imaginative and unexpected episode. The biggest surprise is that this far-out concept, which is built like a house of cards, is not only accessible but seems to work on all levels. The writing, directing, acting, costuming, and music all come together to make a near-perfect episode. The theme of this story rings clear. A government which oppresses its people, destroying trust and patriotism, cannot survive. It may take centuries, but governments of this type will eventually topple. The comparisons from 1967 are easy to spot. The good federation is the United States. The evil empire is one part the Soviet Union, one part just pick a military dictatorship. And there were many coming into power at the time and making the news as this episode was being written. In Africa, there were 10 alone and several more in Latin and South America. On April 21st, 1967, as the story outline for Mirror Mirror was expanded into a teleplay, a military junta seized power in Greece, resulting in what the press called the regime of the colonels, as one military officer seemingly replaced another in a real-life game of King of the Hill. And Ross says, jailbreak. Okay, so they break out of the brig. Okay. I mean, that could be interesting. I mean, I don't think it really jives with what we see well, I guess by the end of the episode, they could have been caught again. And yeah, I guess that could work. They break out of the brig for a little while and cause trouble and eventually get caught and put back in. Yeah, that could be interesting. That could be fun to watch. Okay, there is one flaw in Mirror Mirror, the story's lack of logic. Yeah, if the crew of the ISS Enterprise are darker versions or opposites of those on the good Enterprise, then why are there Halkins, peace-loving and meek pacifists in both universes? A fair point. And does it, shouldn't the Halkins be even more ruthless, even more vicious, you would think? And that's setting aside the whole thing, the whole conceit of how when they get transposed into the other universe, the two groups of crewmen get transposed, but their uniforms don't. They literally they literally beam into the clothing of the other person. It's just, that's the big thing for me, that you really just have to swallow that, where it's like, come on. Come on now. Okay, and does it stand to reason that every member of the Enterprise's crew, the people Kirk normally interacts with, would have an alternate self on the ISS Enterprise, having survived the barbarism of their place and time? And would the same four, Kirk, McCoy, Scotty, and Uhura, be beaming up in two different universes at the same time? It was a rare occurrence that Scotty and Uhura were ever members of a landing party, let alone in two universes simultaneously. This is pure fantasy, but it doesn't matter. Mirror Mirror is wonderful escapism, and its accolades were well established in 1968 when the Hugo Awards took notice. Okay, so as noted, this episode was written by Jerome Bixby. Again, and this would not be his last episode. So, of the people who wrote on Star Trek, Gene Coon would be the one who wrote the most episodes, which I think was like 13. And Roddenberry wrote like 12, 10 to 12, somewhere around there. And DC Fontana wrote about 10. Or at least they had writing credits for that many. And they actually rewrote or did some writing on many, many more episodes than that. But those are the ones they're credited with. Now, after them, the one with the next most number of episodes is John Meredith Lucas, who wrote 6, I think. And then after him, the one with the most credits is Jerome Bixby, who would go on to write 5 episodes of Star Trek. And he did that because he was actually one of the first people to come onto Star Trek as a Star Trek fan. He was a fan of the show. Bixby at 43 had dabbled in television, writing several episodes of the 1960s series Man into Space, which I've never heard of before, but was best known as a prolific writer of sci-fi short stories. One such story, It's a Good Life, was adapted by Rod Serling for The Twilight Zone. The famous horror tale starred a 7-year-old Bill Mumy of Lost in Space as a monstrous boy who sends people he doesn't like into, quote-unquote, the cornfield, unquote. Yeah, I remember that episode vaguely. On the big screen, Bixby wrote Curse of the Faceless Man, The Lost Missile, and the cult classic It, the Terror from Beyond Space, which would actually be adapted by 2 different writers into Star Trek episodes. One, Alien Spirit by Norman Katkov, which was commissioned as the 15th episode actually in 1966, but was never used. And then Sisters in Space by Robert Sheckley, also in 1966. And this one would have been episode 25, but it also was not used. I guess because they didn't like the writing on it. In 1966, Bixby provided the story for the epic big screen film Fantastic Voyage, which, it's definitely one of the big sci-fi films of the late 60s. I'm sure most people that watch this will be familiar with it, but if you don't know the film, the plot basically is that the president of the United States has a brain tumor, I think it is, and it's inoperable. Conventional medicine can't treat it, because they didn't have chemo and radiation therapy back then. And so they, as one does, they devise a plan where the government they don't have chemotherapy or radiation therapy, but they do have a shrink ray. And so the plan is to take a team of people, shrink them down in a submarine to microscopic size, and then inject them into the president. Then they will travel to the president's brain and destroy the tumor, therefore saving the president's life. And it's also a bit of a Cold War story because as they're going along, I don't remember everyone who's in the movie. The main things I remember is Donald Pleasance is along, and he actually turns out to be a Soviet spy, and he tries to sabotage the mission. And I also remember that Raquel Welch is in it and looking mighty good in it too. Okay, while that movie was filming, he amused himself by writing a spec script for a new series that he had taken a liking to called Star Trek. The title of this episode was Mother Tiger. Otto Clement, Bixby's agent, submitted the screenplay to Desilu on November 15th, 1966, with a humble note, reading, quote, "I don't know what led him into the speculative venture of writing a complete original screenplay usable for only one program. He told me that he loves the show and he had a lot of fun writing it," unquote. Clement knew that it was very unlikely that Star Trek would buy an unsolicited screenplay. Television just didn't work that way in those days. Ideas are pitched, outlines written, and if approved by the network, a script assignment is given out, with the producers and network providing notes throughout the process. On December 6th of 1966, Roddenberry wrote to Gene Coon, quote, "I like this effort very much indeed, skillfully done and with a flair for a Star Trek audience, which is unique among our first drafts." Coon wrote to Clement informing him that Star Trek had all of its scripts for the first season and that the series had yet to be picked up for a second year. Nonetheless, he said, quote, "We are interested in Bixby." 2 months later, Coon summoned Bixby as a writer for the new season, but he did not want Mother Tiger. Bixby's spec script had the Enterprise encountering a sleeper ship, an idea already used in Space Seed. If purchased, this part of the story would have to be changed. Besides this, the premise involved finding an alien baby in suspended animation who, when revived, grows at an accelerated rate, growing into a beautiful woman, the sole survivor of her race, and she is about to procreate. This idea concerning an alien who is the mother for the next generation of her race made the story seem too similar to Devil in the Dark. Curiously, Gene Coon's story outline for Devil in the Dark uh, was written just 2 weeks after the screenplay for Mother Tiger was submitted. Bixby said, quote, "I always found that a rather curious coincidence," unquote. There were no hard feelings. All Bixby wanted was a chance to write for his favorite show, and the opportunity came in February of 1967. After turning down Mother Tiger, Roddenberry and producer Gene Coon invited Jerome Bixby to pitch some new ideas. The one that clicked was a reworking of a short story he had published in 1952 called One Way Street. Bixby later said, quote, "I thought of a parallel universe for Star Trek, a very savage counterpart, virtually a pirate ship into which I could transpose a landing party," unquote. The memory plays tricks on one's mind. Bixby's original submission for Mirror Mirror did not offer a savage counterpart or a pirate ship or even a landing party. Bixby's original version of Mirror Mirror only had subtle differences. That other Enterprise only had subtle differences from the one Kirk came from. The crew on that other universe is a good and decent crew of people, and Kirk beams there alone with no landing party in tow. Bixby's story did present a parallel universe, but this was not something new to Star Trek. Roddenberry had touched on this in a 1964 series proposal for Star Trek several years earlier, with a synopsis for an episode that would have been titled The Mirror. Quote, "There were no pirates in Roddenberry's version, only a duplicate Enterprise, much like in Bixby's. Harlan Ellison also included the idea of a savage alternate universe with a pirate Enterprise as a subplot in his original script for City on the Edge of Forever." Yeah, and if you'll recall the stream I did where I talked about the that episode, and I took a look at a comic book adaptation of that, we got to see kind of a rendition of that other Enterprise. It only appears very briefly, though. And of course, there was another episode that had a parallel universe story, The Alternative Factor, which, blech, probably the worst episode of the first season. Bixby's approach, although completely different than he remembered, and from what was eventually produced, nonetheless intrigued Kuhn and Roddenberry, and they sent the writer home to work out these specifics. So he eventually went home and he did a reworking and then came up with a different version of the story. And they liked it, but again, they wanted changes. Okay. Kuhn had Bixby revamp his outline. This version he turned in on March 2nd of 1967, as with the previous one, was light years away from what eventually was filmed. In this tale, Kirk is beaming up from the planet Rigel 4 when the Enterprise is struck by a violent warp storm. The transporter room Kirk materializes into is only slightly different from the one he expected. And there to greet him are Spock, Scotty, and McCoy. It is McCoy who has a beard in this version, not Spock. Before Kirk can speak, Spock tells him how, quote, the war is going badly. Kirk, confused and needing time to think, goes to his quarters. And when he gets to his quarters, he encounters a woman there named Anna, who it turns out is his wife in this other universe. And that sort of sets up the teaser for the episode. Now, in Act 1, Kirk, using the computer, discovers that this Federation is at war with a race called the Tharns, who have recently conducted surprise attacks. He has many questions, and the computer becomes suspicious, refusing to give further information without a security code. Kirk, it turns out, has the right code, one thing from this universe that carried over to the other unaltered, but he now knows that his Enterprise and its computer do not function the same way as his universe. Kirk is called to the bridge to receive a subspace call from Admiral McNulty, informing him that the Federation is losing the war with the Tharn and will have to surrender. Kirk is ordered to rendezvous with elements of the Tharn fleet and turn over the Enterprise to their leader, who will then lead the ship to the nearest starbase. Meanwhile, the crew is becoming increasingly suspicious of the captain. He doesn't know certain details about the ship or about them or about the universe they live in. And Kirk also starts experiencing dizzy spells. The bearded McCoy wants to take him to sickbay for an examination, but Kirk stalls. The Tharn rendezvous takes place, and Kirk notices their ships do not have shields that can withstand a phaser blast. He is confused how they could have beaten the Federation. He tells Spock that a phaser barrage could destroy any number of the enemy ships. Spock replies, "What is a phaser?" And it's interesting because when you read this earlier version of the episode, you see a lot of elements that made their way into later Star Trek episodes, not for this series, but particularly for Next Generation. Because there's the episode Conundrum, where, an alien basically gives the crew of the Enterprise D, the Next Gen crew, amnesia, so they don't know who they are and don't know details about their universe. But when they consult the computer, they're told that they're at war with this other race. I don't forget their names. I remember their names. And they're on a mission to attack the main star base of this alien race in order to turn the tide of the war, because the Federation is losing the war. And so it sounds like a very similar setup. And then when they start encountering the ships of this other race, their technology is clearly far inferior to the Federation. And of course, they start asking, well, how are these people our mortal enemies and winning a war if they're so much weaker than us, if their technology is so less advanced? And when they get to the starbase, again, it's like a pretty small starbase and not impressive at all, and has very minimal shielding. And I remember even there's a point where Riker says one photon torpedo ought to do it. So it's interesting how that is similar. And also the whole thing of Kirk coming to this other universe where he has this other life, and he's married and has a wife, because they had what was the episode? I forget it. I forget the name. It's the one where Riker wakes up and it's like 20 years later, 15 years later, and he's captain of the Enterprise. And of course, everyone else is aged, and he has some illness. Like at some point, he had contracted some illness that was retroactively getting rid of his memories or something like that. So he doesn't remember anything before he contracted the virus. So he's missing the last 20 years. And he's married in this universe, and he has a kid. But of course, eventually he begins to become suspicious about these things. And it turns out that it's all a simulation that the Romulans are running. But then it turns out that's a simulation too, and that it's actually this alien who was manipulating him. And also there was the episode, is it Parallel? I forget the name. It's the one where Worf is switching. It's one of the last episodes where Worf is shifting through all these different parallel universes. And in like at least one of these other parallel universes, he and Troy are married. Okay. Now, in Act 2 of the episode, the Enterprise leads 10 Tharn vessels to Starbase 1. During this time, Kirk tries to come up with a way to create a phaser. Anna, now at one point she kisses Kirk, and after they kiss, she realizes he's not the same guy, so she puts a knife to his throat, accusing him of being a Tharn spy. Spock then submits to a Vulcan mind probe, and Spock discovers that he is from a parallel universe and is not a danger to them, and that he may in fact be able to help them defeat the Tharns. Efforts are stepped up to develop a phaser, which is then used to defeat the Tharns. Kirk holds himself together until the danger to the mirror universe or mirror Enterprise has passed, and then he collapses due to the feigning spells, I guess. Mirror Spock and Mirror Scott know they must find a way to get him home by recreating the conditions which affected the transporter during the warp storm, and they're able to beam him back to his own Enterprise. Once there, a pretty nurse tends to Kirk in sickbay, and of course the nurse is Anna, his wife in that other universe. Dorothy Fontana didn't hate the episode, but there were elements of the story that concerned her. She wrote to Kuhn, quote, "On page 4, we have the beginning of symptoms of weakness and dizziness affecting Kirk. I suggest we not have this, if possible, as we did the same thing in The Enemy Within, along with the transporter malfunction bit. So that plot point would have to be removed." And Fontana also felt there needed to be a better explanation for Kirk going from one universe to the other. Now, again, there was a series of rewrites, and memos going back and forth to people about the episode. I'm not going to cover every single one of them. Let's see here. Okay, so Gene Kuhn was hip deep in rewrites, including trying to make the Apple screenplay work. So Roddenberry rewrote the outline for the episode and sent it to Kuhn on April Fool's Day of that year with a note saying, quote, "This is my rewrite of Bixby's rather complex Mirror Mirror. Frankly, I did this one in 1 2-hour session with the microphone, and having not had time to read or analyze it, need your corrections and comments as soon as possible so that we can Mimeo it, send it to NBC, and get a copy to Bixby so he can start on the first draft of the teleplay." Roddenberry hadn't merely simplified the descriptions and found a way to make a parallel universe comprehensible. He had completely reinvented the story, with a nod toward his own earlier teleplay, The Mirror. Roddenberry kept the germ of the idea from Bixby, and one name, that of the Tharn, would be kept, not as the name of a race, but now as a person. Tharn became the spokesman for the alien race, the Halkans. Where is he here? Here he is. There he is. Kuhn tidied up Roddenberry's outline and sent it off to the network. Stan Robertson, unaware that Roddenberry had actually rewritten the thing, still credited Jerome Bixby. Robertson, who had not liked the story previously, now reversed his previous decision and accepted the story for further development. Mirror Mirror was the most daring and risque. Oh, well, wait. First, but the approval did not come without concerns. He told Roddenberry, quote, "As we begin a new season, you might want to remind your writers, directors, and the other members of your creative team that the visual element we are looking for in Star Trek does not mean to add violence, nor does the high dramatic quality we wish to carry the connotation of inserting more implied sex or the types of costuming and dialogue which would offend our viewers. In other words, less violence and less sex, which, interesting. Mirror Mirror was the most daring and risque concept yet attempted, with plenty of violence and oodles of sex, but it also gave the network many things Stan Robertson had wanted. A story that begins on a planet, not on the Enterprise, as well as a premise, story structure, and a look unlike anything Star Trek had done before. No one could accuse this fantastic tale of treading anywhere near sameness. Bixby, following Roddenberry's blueprint, turned in his first draft teleplay on May 26th. It was Roddenberry's idea to better utilize the regular supporting cast. He wrote to Kuhn because apparently Bixby introduced a couple of new characters, like a chief of security and a couple of other characters. And Roddenberry wrote to Kuhn saying, quote, "Let's consider if we actually need to add security officer Hudson. Could Sulu possibly do that role instead? We don't make much use of him. Is it possible to give Larson, another security officer's, business to him? If we end our show on the bridge of our real Enterprise, we would have an interesting moment where Uhura joins the bridge and gives the innocent Sulu a nasty look." Kuhn implemented the change, having Sulu play the ruthless Scarface security officer. And then the new drafts of the script would have the tag scene staged on the bridge. But the bit of reaction when Uhura and the innocent Sulu meet, as suggested by Roddenberry, was not realized. Other suggestions made by Roddenberry at this stage in the stage of the script's development were ignored by Kuhn, despite the fact that Roddenberry, in a sense, outranked him. Let's see. Now, Dorothy Fontana got her turn with the script, creating the Mimeo department's first draft in early June. And she steamed up the role of Uhura with much of the teasing scene between her and Sulu on the bridge. So that whole bit of business with Sulu and Uhura, she wrote. Quote, "In any show I wrote or rewrote, I was always trying to get something more for the women," Fontana said. "More for Nichelle, more for Majel, more for anybody that we had as a female guest lead. A lot of times the stuff for Nichelle and Majel got cut out, which I hated, but I was not the final arbiter on those." Kuhn polished the script, creating the final draft on July 17th, with page revisions coming on the 18th, 19th, and 20th, and just one day before filming was to begin on the 24th. By the time those last pages were in, Fontana and Kuhn, with input from Roddenberry, had provided pretty much half the dialogue, but Bixby was still the preeminent writer and received all the credit. Okay. So Mark Daniels returned for his fourth directing job of the second season. Where is that? Yeah, there's that. Okay, now, and as mentioned previously, the main guest star in this episode was Barbara Luna. Find a good image of her here. Come on here. Well, come on now. I guess that one will do. Daniels and Joseph Pevney had alternated episodes for the last 2 months. While one was busy filming one episode, the other was prepping his upcoming episode while at the same time supervising the editing on the one he had done before that. Barbara Luna was 27 when she signed aboard the Enterprise as Marlena, the captain's woman. She had been on the stage in New York as a child, and having blossomed into an alluring woman, was already a prolific actress in television and film, with multiple turns on Zorro, Hawaiian Eye, and the FBI. She also played opposite Desi Arnaz on an episode of the series Desilu Playhouse, in an episode called So Tender, So Profane, playing his Cuban sister. Luna said, quote, I had done so many roles as the senorita, or the Japanese girl, or the Chinese girl, or the Hawaiian girl. So when I left New York, everyone told me I'd be typecast when I got to Hollywood. But it was the sci-fi world where I wasn't hired just for my ethnicity. In fact, when I read the script for Mirror Mirror and saw the part that they had written for Marlena, I remember thinking, wow, why did they ask me for this, to do this? There was nothing ethnic about the character. There was no accent. She was just a woman, and I thought that that was very interesting, that they chose someone of my type to play her. It was very exciting that Gene Roddenberry had created a show that had those kinds of roles. Not only were they not hired based on their ethnicity, but the roles were powerful. I mean, in 1967, for a woman to have that kind of power as with Marlena, where with just one little push of a button, she could kill someone. In the sci-fi genre, Luna had appeared on The Outer Limits, The Wild Wild West, and The Invaders. Joe DaGosta liked Luna enough to also cast her in 2 episodes of Mission Impossible, and Luna would later work with William Shatner again on an episode of T.J. Hooker. Quote, it's amazing that one TV show is my most famous credit, Luna said 3 decades later. I've worked with Jimmy Stewart, Henry Fonda, and Yul Brynner in movies, but people care more about Star Trek. Vic Perrin, and let me bring that back up. This is Vic Perrin here. Was 51 and on his 3rd episode of Star Trek, finally getting to appear in person. He plays Tharn, the Halkan leader. Perrin had already supplied the voice for the Metron in Arena and also the voice of Nomad in Changeling. A much sought-after actor during the golden era of radio drama, Perrin was also well regarded within television as the control voice introducing each episode of The Outer Limits. So if you ever wonder know what he looked like, there you go. As an actor, Perrin was well liked by Jack Webb and appeared in 24 episodes of Dragnet, including several color episodes being produced at this time. In science fiction, Perrin played a Martian in People Are Alike All Over, an episode of The Twilight Zone with Star Trek guest star Susan Oliver, who played Vina in The Cage. Quote, I was on camera for only one Star Trek episode, yet I think almost as many people recognize me from Mirror Mirror as they do from The Outer Limits, Perrin said. I have been recognized as Tharn on an international basis, ranging from London, Munich, Tokyo, and Singapore. John Winston, returning as Lieutenant Kyle, is given one of his better acting roles in the series, screaming and writhing as the victim of Mirror Spock's agonizer. Bring that up. There we go. Your agonizer, please. Pete Kellett played Farrell, Kirk's henchman. Let me see if I can bring up an image of him here. Did I save one of him? Let me see here. I think I had an image of him. Where's the... Here we go. I'm not sure if it's a really good image of him, but that's Farrell right there. The guy standing between Kirk and Spock in that shot. The guy who's balding. He was a stuntman and actor who appeared often on television, including multiple turns on Gunsmoke. Returning to Star Trek, he would later be seen briefly as a Klingon in Day for the Dove and as a morgue guard in Spock's brain. Garth Pillsbury would play Chekhov's henchman, who then turns on him to save Kirk. And I know I had an image of him firing the phaser. There he is. That's him there. Let's see. Where was it? Now, he would later return to Star Trek as a troglodyte prisoner leaping from the city suspended in the sky in The Cloudminders. Of his first Trek, Pillsbury said, quote, "My agent called and said, I have a small part for you in a show called Star Trek, and we set up an appointment for you to read for it. And keep in mind that this character is kind of a smart-ass guy. So I walked into the casting director's office, and there were 4 or 5 people at this table, and I kind of acted a little like a wise guy. And a couple of people thanked me profusely as I was going out, and I thought, well, this is fantastic. I'm sure I'm going to get this part. A week went by, and I called my agent and said, Phil, what happened to the Star Trek thing? I thought I did very well. And he said, yeah, everybody liked you, except the director, who thought you were a jerk. So another 4 or 5 days go by, and I got a call from my agent. He says, Garth, you got the part. Of all the people that read, you did the best, so they decided to go with you anyway, though the director still thinks you're a wise guy. And Rosh Ashburn says, why are the Halkins pacifists in both universes? Seems like they would be warlike in one or the other, or at least have a completely opposite motivation for their refusals. Yeah. I mean, that is kind of one of the, I mean, let's face it, there are some serious plot holes in this episode. And it takes a good deal of suspension of belief to make this work. Again, the whole thing of them appearing in the uniforms to me is the big thing. It's just like, okay, and not only that, but you could even say, okay, I could see that happening once, but then when they do the beam teleport at the end of the episode, the same thing happens. And so I guess you have to think that in the other universe at the same time, they had the same idea and were beaming those people back to their universe at the same time, I guess. I don't know. And yeah, the whole thing with the Halkins, it is an obvious sort of logical, I don't know, a sort of logical stumble there where they don't really follow through on the premise as much. I guess it's just to wave it away and say, yeah, they just didn't. I guess maybe because you would say it's just Earth and it's just humans that are different, because Spock really isn't that different. I mean, let's face it. I mean, he is ruthless, but is that because Vulcans are different, or just because they're sort of, they've been conquered by Earth and they have to work within this culture, and so they really don't have a whole lot of choice? I guess you could argue it that way, that it's just Earth that is different and humans that are different, maybe. Okay. Regarding his 6th appearance in the series and his 2nd in a row since growing his hair long enough to appear without a wig, Walter Koenig said, during that first year, I had no contract, but for some reason they would bring us the next week's script while we were shooting the current episode. I'd look to see if Chekhov was still there, and more often than not, he was. This is all during the spring and summer as we were shooting these episodes. None had aired, so there was no reaction yet from the fans, and my psychological disposition is just to assume the worst. I never really allowed myself to think that I was going to be a recurring character until they told me I was. So it was exciting to see my name in the next script to film, and they were certainly giving me some good roles in those first several episodes. Okay, filming for this episode began. Wow, I'm at over an hour and a half already. Yeah, doing it this way without the PowerPoint really slowed the stream down. Normally, I'd be through these in a little over. I don't think I've ever gone over about an hour and 15 or 20 minutes before. Filming began Tuesday on July 25th, 1967. Remembering her first day on set, Barbara Luna said, it was just another TV job, except that you walk in and you see this guy with funny ears and a very interesting cast and the sets and effects, but we certainly didn't know what this was going to turn out to be, unquote. Costume designer Bill Theiss raised eyebrows with Nichelle Nichols and Barbara Luna's bad girl uniforms. Yeah, let's bring that up. Why not? Let me shuffle these here a little. Okay. Good shot of them. There's a good shot of them together near the end of the episode. Where is that? There it is. Yeah. There we go. The gold sashes worn by each man on the ISS Enterprise and the different insignias, as well as Kirk's sleeveless top, were quite memorable. It was here that the red-shirted security men began wearing a black waistband. The purpose was to differentiate them from others who wore red shirts, such as the technical and engineering officers. This look would actually be carried over to the main Enterprise for future episodes. So let me bring that up. I can find a good shot of that. I think that shot where Scotty's going into the engineering section and he's stopped. Where is that? Here we go. I don't know if you can see it well, but you can see the security guard has this kind of waistband on. And I don't know, I guess I cut it off too small to really tell on Scotty, but I guess they would keep this look for the security to help differentiate them from other red shirts in the crew. The only noticeable flaw in Mirror Mirror, as often happened on a Mark Daniels set, is the staging of the fight scene. Many shots were framed too close and held too long. Anyone with good vision or a TV bigger than about 13 inches could tell that the stunt doubles were being used. Daniels had done it this way before in Court Martial and Space Seed. And yeah, and he didn't direct that episode, but I think what is it? A Wolf in the Fold also was a very bad offender in that department as well. It looks really bad. Let me see if I can find a. Here we go. Yeah, I mean, if you look, you can tell that's not DeForest Kelly there. Leonard Nimoy said, quote, "The studio simply did not want actors doing those things when there's a possibility for them to be hurt, because if they're hurt, it shuts down production. They would much rather, although it seems like a crude way to put it, that it be a stuntman because the production won't get shut down. And of course, a stuntman gets well paid for doing that. That's his business. He knows how to do it. If he gets hurt, that's part of his profession," unquote. Daniel said, quote, "Nichelle Nichols was furious because I used a stunt woman in the fight. She said, I want to do that. That woman doesn't look anything like me." And I said, "You've got to be out of your mind. This is a complicated stunt. You could get hurt badly unless you know what you're doing, and the production couldn't afford to have you knocked out." The stunt wasn't actually that complicated. Daniels was being overly cautious, and this was one more reason why he was very much in demand as a director for television. He usually stayed on schedule, usually brought shows in on budget, and no series regulars ever got hurt. So I guess he did wind up relenting and letting Nichelle take part in this scene. Okay, Barbara Luna recalls, "When you're working in television, there's no such thing as calling up and saying, 'I am sick. I can't come in.'" And it turns out that on day 4 of filming, she woke up not feeling well. And it turned out she had the flu. So she actually had to step out and would not appear during the filming. And this would necessitate a brief break in the filming of this episode. "I was so ill that my temperature was up about 103 and I had no voice. So when I got to the studio, they looked at me and said, 'Oh no, she's too contagious.' And of course, what we had left was the kissing scene with Shatner and the dialogue between us in his cabin. So the director said, if she just looks at anybody, they're going to get sick. You would have nobody less. You'll have to, you can't film her, so just send her home," which is what they did. I felt badly because I had never, ever missed work before. but I felt so sick that it seemed like a whole month before I could come back, even though it may have only been a couple of weeks. On day 6, the scenes on the bridge were completed, including the memorable encounter between Uhura and Sulu, where she flirts with him and then slaps his face and pulls a knife. This is one of Nichelle Nichols' most memorable moments in the series. Her look in that bad girl parallel universe uniform is stunning. This may also be George Takei's finest hour on Star Trek. The evil Sulu is a delicious character. Takei said, quote, "The alternative universe image of Sulu as a dark villain in Mirror Mirror showed something interesting about his human side. And in Naked Time, he was crazed. Ironically, we only get a chance to see Sulu when he is not Sulu." On day 7, Wednesday, August 2nd, the scenes in the elevator and the corridor were filmed, including the fight between Kirk and the evil Chekhov and his henchman. Gareth Pillsbury, who began by following orders from Chekhov and then switched to Kirk's side, said, quote, "I'd never been on a set like that before, and it did impress me. I thought, wow, what an incredible job they did making this look real from the camera's point of view." The scene begins with Kirk exiting the elevator and getting smacked in the face. Yeah, let me bring that up. Hold on here. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I thought I got a pretty good image of this, where he gets popped in the face there. And this is really well done. I mean, it's one of the most convincing looking physical blows in the series. I mean, honestly, there are several, including several in this episode, that look obviously not real. You know, I know in Cat's Paw there's a bad one where Kirk is supposed to be punching McCoy, and I mean his fist is at least half a foot away from McCoy's face when he quote unquote punches him, and McCoy falls down. And yeah, there's a few other in this episode too. The scene begins with Kirk exiting the elevator and getting smacked in the face. Pillsbury was the one cast to give the hit in the face, and he recalled, "I said, okay, I'll do that." And Shatner said, "Oh, no, you won't. I'm getting a stuntman to do that." So they had a stuntman step in and do it instead, presumably because the stuntman would have more experience at this sort of thing and know better how to basically fake a punch and make it look real without actually hitting a person. And Ross Ashburn asks, does a Kelvin timeline mirror universe exist? There probably is in some comics, or maybe in a novel. I don't know. I haven't really read any of the expanded universe stuff for the Kelvin movies, but I would bet there probably is. I know there's been multiple like comic book adaptations that show the mirror universe. And there was one of my favorite Star Trek novels is Dark Mirror, which is where the Next Generation cast encounters the mirror universe, which I never understood why they didn't do why they didn't do that when the series was on. That seemed like such a no-brainer to do, but oh well. And honestly, overall, I'm not a huge fan of the mirror universe stuff on Deep Space Nine. I mean, it's okay, but I don't know. I just don't enjoy it as much. Seeing the evil versions of the characters and them being all treacherous, it's much more fun. Unlike in the alternate universe where the humans are basically all defeated and kind of just victims mostly. Okay. So they had a stuntman step in and deliver the blow, but that was me taking the fall when Kirk did the punching of me. And he wanted to see me punched. That's why my agent said the character was kind of a wise guy. His look is telling us what he's thinking. My expression is basically just, man, I just did you a favor, like he's just begging for it. And Kirk decks him. But Shatner didn't actually hit me. People can't tell from the angle of the camera with his hand moving so fast, but he knew how not to hit me. He just didn't trust me to be as careful, and you can't blame him. He gets a broken nose, and then they're done for the day. If I get a broken nose, then the director yells cut, and then they just move on to the next scene. So everything went fine, and then Mark Daniels yelled cut. I was out of there for a year until the Cloudminders. Mark Daniel didn't have much to say to me, really. I just did my lines, I got decked, and then I left, unquote. For this scene, okay, for the scene where he's in the agony booth, let me bring that up. There it is. So the scene where he's in the agony booth, Walter Koenig was called on to scream. This was his first scream in Star Trek, and there would be more. Quote, "If you scream once, you're a screamer forever," Koenig bemoaned. Okay, so then on day 8, they called her back, Barbara Luna back to film again. Now there had been a weekend in between. So yeah, it was about 6 or 7 days that she was gone from the set. And they actually, at this point, they actually were filming The Deadly Years. And they had to halt, I think, production on Deadly Years for like a day while a day or two while Daniels came in and shot the remaining scenes with Luna. And it's the scenes they filmed after she came back. Again, let me shuffle these here. Where is it? Here we go. Yeah. So these were the scenes, or at least part of the scenes that were filmed while after she came back from being sick. Now, the reason they put her in this thing in the first place is because while she was sick, she lost some weight. So when she came back to film the scenes, the costume that they had made for her didn't fit her properly anymore. And so that's why when they did the scene, they basically just put her in this thing. She's just she's got a bikini on underneath it and just wearing this. And yeah, she looks darn good in it. Ross Ashburn says, "How does an agonizer work exactly?" Yeah, well, I theorized at the beginning. It just seems like it's a taser, honestly, because it's got this little like electrical bolts coming out of it. So that's how I would theorize. It's really just a fancy word for a taser. Agonizer makes it sound more evil. Luna recalled that outfit I wore didn't fit after I had fallen ill after missing those couple of weeks. I've always been tiny, but I guess in those 2 weeks, because I was so ill that I must have lost a bit of weight, because when I went back to shoot the cabin scene and I'm in the doorway and I was wearing my costume and it was just hanging off of me. I said, no, not good. And Roddenberry came in and said, put her in something else. And Bill Theiss, being the genius he was, put me in a bikini. And then he brought in some more material. And right there on the set, I mean, he literally just draped this stuff on me. And I'm standing in the doorway and you could see right through it. I almost looked nude. And for that time, it was very daring for television. As for that kiss, which was nearly 2 weeks in coming, the second and much more passionate kiss between Kirk and Milena in that episode, Luna said, quote, "I enjoyed the kissing scene because Bill is a good kisser," unquote. I'm sure Bill would agree. Whereas, yeah, here we go.
Melvar, you have to respect your actors. When I directed Star Trek IV, I got a magnificent performance out of Bill because I respected him so much.
And when I directed Star Trek V, I got a magnificent performance out of me because I respected me so much.
That line always cracks me up. Okay, now they actually used a different teleportation effect in this episode. When they're beaming in or out of the mirror universe, such as here, this is actually a different effect than they normally use for transporters. This was done by Van de Veer Photo Effects. And this different teleportation effect would actually be used again for the Klingons in Day of the Dove and also in the Cloud Minders. For an episode with so many visual flourishes, Mirror Mirror, at a cost of $188,530, only ran $8,530 above the studio mandated per episode allowance. The deficit on cash poor Desilu was now up to $145,971, which in 2013 dollars would be more than $1 million. Now, unfortunately, although this is one of the most beloved Star Trek episodes, when it aired, it actually did badly in the ratings. Star Trek was usually second in the ratings during season 2, coming in second to Gomer Pyle in the first half hour, and second to the Friday Night Movie in the second half hour of the show, and running slightly ahead of another show on ABC called Hondo. But in this case, when this episode aired, it actually was third in the ratings with a 23.6 audience share in the first half hour and a 23.2 audience share in the second half hour. Now, apparently, this is probably because the Friday Night Movie that it ran up against this night was actually the film Viva Las Vegas, starring Elvis Presley. And on this night, with younger viewers wanting to see the King, Star Trek fell to number 3. So I guess Elvis still had some popularity with the Utes back then. Again, the numbers leaned in a different direction when only metropolitan areas were polled. The national report had Honda with a 1% audience share above that of Star Trek. The 12-city Trindex report showed just the opposite, this time with Star Trek taking a similar lead over Hondo. So in the Trindex ratings, it had a 14.2% rating over the 13.6 for Hondo. All of the inspired work on Mirror Mirror came together to create an episode worthy of a nomination for a Hugo Award, one of the 5 Star Trek nominations for 1967, with the winner to be selected at the awards show on Labor Day weekend 1968. Nichelle Nichols named Mirror Mirror as one of her favorite episodes. She said, quote, "I loved any of the episodes in which the various characters were able to interact with one another and advance the storyline at the same time. We were the first ensemble cast." William Shatner considered this to be among Star Trek's very finest. Trek magazine took a poll in the mid-1970s. Its readers picked their favorite episodes, and Mirror Mirror came in number 10. Entertainment Weekly's editors picked Mirror Mirror as the 3rd best episode of Star Trek from the original series, writing, quote, "worth repeat viewings if only to see Spock's beard." And Star Trek 101, a reference work published by Pocket Books in 2008, placed Mirror Mirror among the original series' 10 best. Vic Perrin reflected, "At that time, there was a congeniality among the people doing series television. You felt you were part of the family, even though you were only in for a day or so. You had that feeling on Star Trek of being accepted. The memories I have working on that show are all pleasant ones. You were made to feel welcome and important to the show's success." Barbara Luna said, "I've had 5-year-olds come up to me, and I mean recently in this case being 2011. This book was published in 2014, I think. Was it 20? Let me check. Yeah, 2014. And say, Marlena, I mean, for being on just one episode, I've had 5 action figures made of me. I think that's history making. I just don't get it. I understand the popularity of the show. I understand that Mirror Mirror is one of those more popular segments, but I watched the show recently and I come into it 20 minutes after it starts, so I don't understand why I get all the compliments that I do. I just don't quite understand why that performance stands apart from any other shows that I did, like a role in The Big Valley, which I liked, and Hawaii Five-0, which was great. I'm told how Mirror Mirror is popular with the fans, but comparatively speaking, I don't quite see it. I know that Trouble with Tribbles is right up there, and I understand why, and Amok Time. And I happen to like the one with Joan Collins. So, comparatively speaking, I don't quite get it that Mirror Mirror is as popular as it is. I can only suspect that maybe because Leonard Nimoy wore a beard and he looked great in it. Dorothy Fontana had no problem getting it. She said, quote, "It was a great concept. We hadn't done anything like it before, and it was a fun show to do," unquote. Okay, I guess that will wrap it up. I'm almost at 2 hours here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and end this one here. Now, next, I won't be streaming this Sunday night as I normally do, and I also won't be streaming next Tuesday because starting Friday, I'm going to be with my National Guard unit, and I'm going to be with them from this Friday to the following Wednesday, I believe, for about 5 or 6 days. So maybe the weekend, 2 weekends from now, or two Tuesdays from now, I will stream again. So the next episode I'm going to take a look at will be the Deadly Years. Hopefully I can get this issue with the PowerPoints figured out, because it makes it much easier. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I'm having this issue, but because I mean, ever since I started doing these, I upload PowerPoints, usually with about 50 to 60 slides in it. And usually there will be 2 of them, because if it gets much bigger than that, the file size is too big and it won't upload. But for some reason, about 20 minutes before I was going to start the stream, I tried uploading them. And for some reason, when I upload the PowerPoints, only the first 2 slides will appear and the rest of this PowerPoint doesn't upload. And that was for both of the different PowerPoints. And I tried multiple times. And I don't know. I tried cutting down the file size. It was already under the limit, but I tried editing some slides out, thought maybe that would work, but I don't know. So I don't know what's going on. But anyway, thank you to everyone who tuned in during the stream. Now, please do like the stream if you would while you're here. I should have said that earlier. I always forget that. And sub to the channel if you haven't previously. I will try to have another video out later this week before I head off to my unit, maybe Thursday. And then, like I say, yeah, I'll probably be back in 2 weeks, and I'll probably be back not this coming Sunday, but the Sunday after that to live stream on Sunday night. So until then, everyone, have a good night, and thanks for tuning in.